Okay, so we are discussing the impact of RDMA on agreement. This appeared in POTC 2019. This is a POTC is a theoretical distributed systems conference. The paper starts more like a systems paper, I would say, in the first couple sections, but then you realize that it's a theory paper because it builds on many other results in the area. It's complex algorithms, etc. There is no evaluation because POTC is not very big on evaluation. If you have a good theoretical result, that's good enough for POTC. So POTC stands for Principles of Distributed Computing. Distributed systems started more like a theoretical field in the 80s. Then, of course, now there are more systems conferences on distributed systems like SOSP, OSDI, etc. But this is, this doesn't quite start like an POTC paper because the first couple sections are still more accessible and it uses a new technology, RDMA. You can easily understand the first couple sections, but then you feel that this is becoming like a POTC paper after you get to the meat of the algorithms. Of course, one of the first authors is Marcos Aguilera. He was from Cornell. He did work on failure detectors. So but then he worked at the industry for many years at Microsoft Research and I think now at VMware. So he has knowledge of both theory and systems. So I guess he's the person that tried to look at the theoretical limits to RDMA agreement. So the topic of the paper, as you could guess from the title, is so RDMA is a new model, and what does this mean for the impossibility result for the consensus algorithms, distributed consensus algorithms? If they could use RDMA, can we improve on the results? Like, can we can we tolerate more faults, and can we do it in less number of communication steps, etc. So that's the idea in the paper. The other people are, Nama Ben David, CMU, Rashid Gurari, EPFL, Virendra Marathe, Oracle, Igor Zablochky, EPFL. Okay. So, okay, RDMA, I don't know too much about RDMA. I don't know the technical details too much, but here is what we know of would be enough to go through the algorithms and make sense of the algorithms. So RDMA means remote direct memory access. So it enables a remote computer to access your local memory without involving the CPU. So this will be done through the network interface card directly after the CPU gives this access to another process. So this helps for scalability, right? You can use your CPU for different things while the network and the disk can be involved in transferring data without the CPU involved, because CPU becomes a bottleneck if it needs to do a lot of outgoing communication and incoming communication, because serialization will be involved. This is basically offloading that thing to the remote process, saying that, I gave you the permission, so just you can access this memory through the network interface card, and I wouldn't be involved. So sort of I'm sharing my disk with you without my CPU getting in the way. For this to work, the CPU has to register that memory region. Memory is divided into regions for access by this remote process P. This pairing is called the Q pair. CPU must also specify what access level is allowed. You can specify on the read access, on the write access, or read-write access to each protection domain for the Q pairs. The memory can be divided into these memory regions, which would be, each of which would be a protection domain. And these protections are dynamic. They could be changed by the CPU, by going through the OS and the kernel, by invoking change protection on this memory. Maybe don't allow P to write anymore, right? And so this is another thing we are going to see the effect this would take on consensus algorithms. So the paper looks at consensus in this model where we could employ RDMA, and it says that when you employ RDMA, you tap into more than classical message passing, or more than classical shared memory as well, because I will get to this in the next slide. They call this M&M model. So you can have both shared memory and message passing, meaning that your memory could be accessed by remote processes that you gave access to. And then you can also be communicating with these remote processing processes by sending them messages and receiving messages from them. And with the dynamic permissions, they say this gives us a lot of power that wasn't there in classical shared memory consensus access, consensus protocols and message passing consensus protocols, okay? So in particular, it says that with Byzantine failures, now we are able to give you an consensus algorithm that requires n is greater than 2fp plus 1 process. Basically, Byzantine consensus algorithm where up to a minority number of processes can fail, but this still achieves consensus. So with message passing, this limit is n is equal to 3fp plus 1, right? But this is not just message passing, this is M&M model. And moreover, this decides in 2 network delays in non-faulty executions, in ideal execution. If it's not an ideal execution, it will take more delay, but they optimize for the best case of ideal executions. This is pretty good, as we will discuss in 2 slides, that this improves on the known limits to message passing and shared memory. And then for crash failures, they give an algorithm that requires n is greater than fp plus 1 processes and decides in 2 delays. So actually in shared memory, there is a algorithm, Disk Paxos, where up to all processes except 1 can fail and you can still have consensus. That's Disk Paxos, that's already known thing. But it requires 4 delays, and this says that now thanks to RDMA, we also improve on that, and we can do this with the same fault tolerance level, n is equal to fp plus 1, and but this time we can decide in 2 delays thanks to RDMA, thanks to the new model. Let me refer to this as the new model. Well, now you're suspecting, okay, processes and memories, when you're reading it through, yes, they separate processes and memories. So memories also have another fault factor. And in both type of algorithms, BFT and CFT consensus algorithms, only up to a minority number of memories can fail. And but the other stuff is the same, classical, meaning that safety is not violated in a fully asynchronous model. Safety is always upheld by these algorithms, and liveness is achieved when we have enough synchrony to make it work. Okay. Okay, so this is the model, right? So processes and memories are different. Processes have their own F. Maybe for Byzantine, up to a minority can die. For CFT, up to all of them except one can die. And memory, in both cases, up to only a minority number of memory can die. And we can still make progress, right? So previously there were algorithms that use shared memory with just processes talking to memories, and without memories, meaning that the processes have local storage and processes communicate with message passing. But this is saying that this is something more because this is both shared memory and message passing, plus we have this dynamic permissions thanks to the new model where we employ RDMA. Okay. So the paper then says that, well, let's compare our results with the impossibility results, with the best results in literature on message passing and shared memory. So it says that with message passing, BFD consensus requires n is greater than or equal to 3FP plus 1, even if the system is synchronous. And they drop this down to n is greater than or equal to 2FP plus 1. And for memories, up to minority number of memories can crash. And CFT consensus with message passing says that n is greater than 2FP plus 1. They say n is greater than FP plus 1 with this new model. So they say that we are able to improve because RDMA has features that are not available in message passing systems. We can access to shared memory as well as message passing, and we can have access to dynamic permissions. And they make this statement, which I want to further dissect in the discussion and analyze. It says that shared memory helps for resilience, message passing helps for performance, and dynamic permissions helps for both. So what do we mean? Shared memory helps for resilience. Consider, I told you that there was a shared memory consensus algorithm that already tolerates n is greater than or equal to FP plus 1 processes. Right? This is called the Disk Paxos from 2005-2006. It uses shared memory, meaning the disks, but no messages. It can tolerate up to all but one process failure, but see, it helped for resilience. The 2FP plus 1, it made to FP plus 1. But they say that the cost is, well, now it takes at least 4 delays. But we are going to show how we can make it 2 delays, so we will look for it. And they actually have, toward the end of the paper, proved that no shared memory consensus algorithm can decide in 2 delays. You need something more than shared memory, which they have, like message passing in addition to shared memory, or I guess in their case, it's more the dynamic permissions. Well, for dynamic permissions, they also use message passing. Dynamic permissions that help for this. Okay. Okay, we will discuss this in the discussion. So to remind you what Disk Paxos is and why this 4 delay comes from, here is what's going on. In Disk Paxos, the acceptor processes are not processes. They are just disks. They are passive. Okay, they just support read block and write block operations. And recently there was a paper that said that they modified some disks with minimal wrappers to support this and show the implementation of Disk Paxos in a system. Yeah, so acceptor processes are passive. they just allow read and write operations to their disk. And each leader owns a block on every disk to which only it can write its messages. So to run phase one, the leader writes a phase 1A message, proposed message in its own block on all of the disks, or the disk that responds to it anyway. And then reads from the blocks of other leaders on the same disk to check if there was another write concurrent with it or after it was doing this with a higher ballot number, right? So it first needs to declare that I'm running this ballot number, but since it cannot receive messages, then it needs to go to those disks and read if there is another, did I succeed to become a leader? Or was there another leader that outbid me with the higher ballot number? Okay, so if the leader does not discover higher ballot number, like in Paxos on a majority of disk, after accessing a majority of disk, it now transitions to phase 2A. And then it does the same thing. First writes it message, then reads that it's not dethroned. So this takes four communications, and that's why they call it 4 delays, right? To write and then to go and read, to write for phase 2, and then to go and read whether it succeeded, okay? Okay, so they say shared memory helps for resilience, but not so much for performance. And they also argue that message passing helps performance. Now for this, the example is fast Paxos. See, with fast Paxos, we have an algorithm that can decide in only 2 delays in common executions, meaning like ideal executions, good executions when you don't have a conflict. But then they say, the downside for this message passing model is now it requires n is greater than or equal to 2fp plus 1 processes. We lost the n is greater than or equal to fp plus 1 processing by going to message passing and reducing the delay. Of course, the punchline is for the CFT consensus, they show algorithm in the new model with n is greater than or equal to fp plus 1 processes, which concludes in 2 delays, combining best of both worlds, message passing and memory, shared memory. Okay. Okay, now this is the third component. And they say this dynamic permissions, remember in RDMA, we could have permissions and dynamically change it. This, they argue, improve both resilience and performance, okay? How does this improve resilience? Well, we can revoke write access from a Byzantine process, right? So this is, so in the BFD algorithm, for the BFD algorithm, we are going to see a composition of 2 algorithms. For the cheap algorithm, the fast and dirt algorithm, they use this to, when panic, you take the write capacity of the leader so that no more, there is no more progress, sort of, and you fail over to the robust algorithm after you panic for it to take care of the rest of the BFD consensus. So this is where it could help for resilience. I don't directly see how this gets the gets us to n is equal to 2fp plus 1, but I can see, yeah, it helps for resilience. Okay, how does it help for performance? We are going to see this in the CFT protocol that they show in the second part. Okay, so if If each process revokes the write permission of other processes before writing to a register, then a process that writes successfully knows that it executed uncontended without having to take additional steps. Remember the Disk Paxos? I had to do another read to see if my phase 1A is worked. Well, here I would get an errors if another leader came and changed the permissions. I would know that I didn't make it. So if I make it, I know that I make it. I don't need to do another read. This is how it improves for the performance and helps cut communication delay. We will see this mainly for the CFT protocol protected Paxos that they mention. That's literally the algorithm. Okay, so now these permissions are a little bit confusing. I have a question to discuss about this in the discussion phase. But this is what the paper has to say about permissions and Byzantine processes. This comes at the last section of the paper. It says that dynamic permissions require the host CPU to change the access levels by going through the OS kernel. The kernel creates the regions and controls the permissions and then shares memory with the user space processes. So these EFT consensus, the processes that participate in consensus, we are assuming they are user space processes. And Byzantine processes cannot change permissions illegally. They need to go through the OS kernel. They need to use the call, and the kernel is trusted. The kernel is trusted. So the assumption is that kernel is not Byzantine, even on Byzantine processes somehow. Okay, or on the disks where the RDMA resides. The Byzantine process cannot divert the protocol and illegally change the permissions. Okay, so that's a big assumption that comes at the end of the paper. Okay, so far so good. Okay, I'll cover the rest more quickly. So this is the BFT protocol. The BFT protocol is actual composition of two protocols. One of them is a cheap quorum protocol. The other is the robust backup protocol with a preferential Paxos wrapper around it. So this idea came from a paper that's called the next 700 BFT protocols. The idea is that have a quick and dirty algorithm like cheap quorum that can work in 2 delays. If everything goes ideal, no Byzantine process or the Byzantine processes even follow protocol, etc. If everything goes ideal, we have a quick solution. If not, this aborts and fails back to the robust algorithm, which is slower, but which is guaranteed to be live. So the cheap algorithm is not necessarily live. So it doesn't solve the BFT consensus necessarily. It solves BFT consensus in good times, in good environment. And if it recognizes it's not a good environment, it basically aborts and stops. It doesn't solve consensus, but luckily we have the sweeper algorithm, the robust but slow algorithm that takes care of it. So the 2 delay is on the good case thanks to the cheap quorum, if cheap quorum works. And if cheap quorum does not work, the other thing still satisfies safety and liveness because it picks up and it gets a decision committed. So we are going to see both algorithms. We need to see first both algorithms, then discuss how they are combined to say that, okay, this is a 2 deciding algorithm in the good executions for weak Byzantine agreement. which can tolerate up to minority number of process failures and up to minority number of memory failures. Okay. Okay. So let's go with the robust backup algorithm. The robust backup algorithm uses only static permissions. It doesn't need to use dynamic permissions. So they say that this robust backup algorithm is also of interest to shared memory BFD consensus problem, because it solves that basically. So the robust backup algorithm in turn is developed in 2 steps. Actually, if we delve into it, more than 2 steps, but let's look at it. The first step is to developing a non-equivocating broadcast to prevent Byzantine processes from sending different values to different processes, right? Byzantine agreement becomes hard when Byzantine processes can send different values to different processes, but it becomes easier if we disallow that and all processes can see what Byzantine processes send to other processes. Of course, signed messages help for this, and the shared memory makes this more efficient, sort of. The second step of the robust backup thing is to use the framework of Clement et al. I think this came like in 2010-ish. This framework converts the non-equivocating, this framework, when equipped with a non-equivocating broadcast primitive, can convert a message passing crash fault tolerant consensus algorithm into a BFD algorithm. So the idea is to use Paxos, which is crash fault tolerant consensus algorithm, combined with non-equivocating broadcast primitive, which we implement through RDMA and signed messages, etc., and then apply the Clement transformation to get to the BFD algorithm of a slow but robust BFD consensus algorithm. Okay. So here is the Clement et al. Transformation. Implement trusted message passing primitives, tsend and trusted send and trusted receive using non-equivocation and signature verification on every message. Processes include their full history with each message and then locally verify whether a receipt message is consistent with the protocol. And they show in their paper that this restricts Byzantine behavior to crash failures. Now you can have a BFD consensus algorithm with n is equal to 2FP plus 1, or in other words, up to a minority number of processes can fail, becoming Byzantine, etc. Okay, I guess that's a nice result. That's a nice result that came around 2010-ish. So to apply the Clement transformation, the paper again takes 2 steps, and it says that first we show that if we had shared memory, like not RDMA, but shared memory, but this is robust shared memory. This is unrealistic. This is single writer, multiple reader registers, but no memory failures. If we had it, we could implement the non-equivocation broadcast or non-equivocation property of tsend and treceive that Clement et al. Require by using non-failing single writer, multiple reader registers. The second step is they show that the RDMA model, the M&M model, can implement the shared memory with failure-prone processes, failure-prone memories up to minority of which can fail. It can implement this supposedly unfailable, uncrashable single writer, multiple reader registers. Okay, so that's the construction for the robust backup. So for the first part about if we had the non-fallible single writer, multiple reader registers, how would we implement non-equivocating broadcast? It would work like this. Before delivering a message KM from Q, each process P checks that no other process saw a different value from Q, right? That's the definition of non-equivocation. If I could see another process that has seen a different value, that could have seen a different value, I'm not going to deliver a message, okay? So how does this work? Each process P has n memory slots per sequence number, okay? These slots are initialized to bottom. Only P can write to these slots, but all processes can read from them. To broadcast its Kate message, P simply writes a signed version of the message in slot KP of its memory. Okay, this is the easy part. How do you broadcast a message? Okay, you write it to all the registers in your segment with your signature. So it's evident it's coming from you. Now the tricky part, to deliver M from Q with K, the following is done. If it is bottom, you try again. It didn't write. But if you read some signed value from Q's KQ's slot, signed meaning that only Q could have written this. So you write this into your own memory. Then you read the slot KQ in every other process's memory, what they wrote, okay? If for every other process R, P reads either M, what it wrote to its memory, or bottom, then P delivers Q's message. Otherwise, P ignores the value from Q because Q has tried to equivocate. So maybe P could be the first one to deliver, but later the Q Byzantine process changes it. The others would basically ignore Q's value because it would see that, well, somebody delivered a message from you. Somebody has written a different, not necessarily delivered, probably delivered, but not necessarily delivered, seen a different message from you with your signature. So you are trying to equivocate. We are not delivering this message. Okay. This is assuming non-fallible single writer, multiple reader model. And next they show that how we can implement this with up to minority failure registers, the RDMA disks. And for this, they use ideas from previous work to implement this single writer, multiple reader regular registers from the fail-prone memory. There were works on boosting tolerance of registers, shared memory registers. So this is why it's becoming a POTSI paper. For sub algorithms, they use like 3 other works, theoretical works, to show how they can use them to construct this sub algorithm. Yeah. And of course, there's no evaluation. That's also why it's POTSI. Okay. Then on top of this, run weak Byzantine agreement using these regular registers. Regular registers meaning that fail-prone. To implement a single writer, multiple reader register, process writes or reads or memories, waits for a majority to respond. When reading, if P sees exactly one distinct bottom value V across the memories, it returns V, otherwise it returns bottom. So this is how it implements the previous non-fallible single writer multiple reader with fallible single writer multiple reader registers using results from previous work. Okay, so that took care of the slow but robust algorithm. Now the cheap Quorum algorithm, the fast but not necessarily complete algorithm. The fast algorithm that works only under ideal conditions. Cheap Quorum uses dynamic permissions to decide in 2 delays in executions in which the system is synchronous and there are no failures. It's not in itself a complete consensus algorithm, as it may panic a board in executions with a fault. And this is where the dynamic permission come into play. A panicking process takes the leader's write permissions, so the leader does not make more progress with the rest of the rest of the processes, maybe leading them into different decisions, right? If you observe non-ideal conditions, you just basically abort this for everyone as much as possible and as soon as possible by changing the dynamic permission for the leader. Okay, if and in the setup, only the leader can write to its register, but this is taking the leader's permission to write to its registers as well, to its regions as well. Yes, if chip quorum aborts, it outputs an abort value. This is used as input to robust backup. Actually, it can be that some processes in chip quorum have different abort values. Some bottom, some non-bottom, because they delivered maybe something from the leader. But then the robust backup, we are going to patch the robust backup with a preferential Paxos algorithm to get some agreement on which values to run the robust backup algorithm, which in turn builds on the Paxos algorithm. Yeah, okay. Okay, how does chip quorum algorithm work? The algorithm has a special process L, which serves both as a leader and a follower. Other processes act only as followers. The memory is partitioned into n+1 regions, denoted region P for each P, and plus region L, in which L proposes a value. Some of the permissions are dynamic, meaning that a panicking process may remove L's write permission to region L, effectively leading to other processes to panic and the algorithm to fall back to the robust but slow algorithm. Okay. Okay, here is the part where we combine these two. For a safe composition, robust backup must decide on a value V if chip quorum decided V previously. To do that, robust backup decides on a preferred value if at least F+1 processes have this value as input. This is how we combine, glue these algorithms. It could be that somebody in chip quorum decided if that's the case, then we should make this as a suitable value, and we should get this decided in the slow but robust algorithm. Otherwise, we could get anything decided. Okay. To do that, robust backup decides on a preferred value if at least F+1 processes have this value as input. For this, it uses classic crash fault tolerant Paxos algorithm run under the Paxos backup algorithm to ensure Byzantine fault tolerance, but with an initial setup phase that ensures the safe decision. So here is where this thing happens. In the setup phase, all processes send each other their input values. Each process P waits to receive n-f such messages and adopts the value with the highest priority that it sees. This becomes the value that P uses as its input to Paxos, or the robust backup algorithms Paxos. Okay, so it's a bit complicated, but it's them put together. And that was basically most of the paper for the BFT part. For the CFT part, it's very simple, and it's like 1 page or so. For the CFT part, they show two separate algorithms, okay? And the first algorithm is protected memory Paxos. This is a two-deciding algorithm. It allows the crash of all but one process, that is n is greater than or equal to fp+1, and it only allows a minority of memories, RDMA disks, to be crashed, okay? And this is a two-deciding algorithm. The other algorithm, aligned Paxos, actually again does a similar trick where it subsumes protected memory Paxos for and regular Paxos, basically runs them side by side And if things are okay, you still have a two deciding algorithm. But the improvement here is that, well, see, in protected memory Paxos, M needs to be greater than 2FM plus 1. So they say that now we can tolerate crashes of a minority of combined set of memories and processes, not necessarily up to minority of each, but we can say up to a minority of combined. It is some improvement, not necessarily big improvement. Still, you are tolerating up to a minority of processes, up to a minority of failures, but previously you were restricted up to a minority of memory failures. Now you are restricted to only up to a minority of combined set of memories and process failures. Okay, so protected memory Paxos removes two delays from Disk Paxos. It's similar to Disk Paxos, but now this is run on RDMA, and we use the dynamic permissions wildcard. Okay, so this retains the structure of Disk Paxos, but uses permissions to skip steps. Initially, some fixed leader L has exclusive write permission to all memories. If another process becomes leader, it takes exclusive permissions. We saw that through the dynamic permission thing, going through kernel, you can take somebody else's permissions. This is what happens. And this is basically the algorithm. So having exclusive permission permits leader L to optimize execution, because L can do two things simultaneously. Write its consensus proposal, let's say P1A, and at the same time determine whether another leader took over. If another leader took over, I wouldn't have this conclude safely, because I would lose my what is it called? Right permission, so I know that I failed. Okay, if I don't know I failed, I succeeded. I don't need to do another read that this Paxos does at the end of phase 1. And similarly for the phase 2, okay? So if L succeeds in 1, it knows no leader M took over, because M would have taken the permission, thus L avoids the last read in this Paxos, saving 2 delays. So this is the protected memory. Aligned Paxos, the paper just literally gives this much explanation and refers to the appendix for the pseudocode, which is not easy to follow. So it just says that aligned Paxos relies on the ability to use both the messages and the memories. It aligns Paxos and protected memory Paxos so that their decisions are coordinated. It has 2 phases, each with 3 steps: communicate, hear back, analyze. Each step treats processes and memories separately and translates the results of operations on different agents to a common language. I'm guessing maybe the protected memory is on the memories and Paxos is on the processes. So by aligning them and taking them, instead of just being able to tolerate up to a minority of memory failures, now this can tolerate up to a minority of process plus memory failures. Slight improvement, right? And that would be thanks to Paxos if the protected memory Paxos failed. Okay, so that's the paper. I guess we can have a longer discussion in the remaining time. First, I need to find Zoom again.